The world headlines. How could Russia's Putin be prosecuted for war crimes in Ukraine?
U.S. President Joe Biden on Monday called for the prosecution of Russian President Vladimir Putin for war crimes over the discovery in Bucha, Ukraine, of mass graves and bodies of bound civilians shot at close range, but various challenges stand in the way. Is targeting civilians a war crime? Yes. The International Criminal Court in The Hague defines war crimes as grave breaches of the post-World War II Geneva Conventions, which lay out humanitarian laws to be followed in wartime. Attacking legitimate military targets where civilian casualties would be excessive also violates the conventions, legal experts say. Bucha's deputy mayor said on Sunday that 50 residents had been victims of extrajudicial killings carried out by Russian troops. The execution of civilians, as alleged in Bucha, is a quintessential war crime, said Jonathan Hafetz, an international criminal law and national security scholar at Seton Hall University School of Law. Russia's defense ministry denies targeting civilians in what it calls a special military operation in Ukraine and says footage and photographs showing bodies in Bucha are yet another provocation by the Ukrainian government. How will investigators collect evidence? Investigators will visit scenes such as Bucha and interview witnesses to build a case, experts said. James Goldston in New York, executive director of the human rights advocacy organization Open Society Justice Initiative, said images and news reports from Bucha will allow investigators in Ukraine to follow up swiftly with survivors of some of the alleged atrocities. Ukrainian forces have captured Russian soldiers, another avenue for obtaining evidence, some experts said, however, that prosecutors might have a tough time obtaining evidence from an active war zone due to safety concerns and witnesses who could be intimidated or otherwise reluctant to speak. Building a case against Putin and other higher UPS for most war crime charges, investigators must prove intent, and a defendant's guilt must be proven beyond a reasonable doubt, experts said. Alex Whiting, a visiting professor at Harvard Law School, said the latest images will make the case easier to prosecute.
Biden's call for Putin to face war crimes trial unacceptable, Kremlin.
The Kremlin has responded to U.S. President Joe Biden's suggestion that Russian President Vladimir Putin should be tried for war crimes. Biden's comments follow mounting international anger over the alleged killing of civilians in Bucha, a town near the capital Kyiv. On Tuesday, the Kremlin said the remarks were unacceptable and unworthy of a U.S. president. Speaking to reporters on a conference call, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov also said the U.S. was likely to impose further sanctions on Russia. Italy, Denmark and Sweden expel Russian diplomats. Reports of atrocities near Kyiv prompted France and Germany to expel Russian diplomats on Monday, and Reuters news agency reports that Italy, Denmark and Sweden have now done the same. Italy has expelled 30 Russian diplomats because of security concerns, it quotes a spokesman for Foreign Minister Luigi Di Maio as saying. And it says Denmark has expelled 15 of Russia's diplomats following emerging evidence of civilian killings in the Ukrainian town of Bucha, near Kyiv. Sweden also says it will expel 3 Russian diplomats who aren't acting in line with the Vienna Convention's international rules, Foreign Minister Ann Linde is reported as saying. Russia's former president and Deputy Security Council Chairman Dmitry Medvedev has responded by saying it will retaliate and slam shut the door on Western embassies. Some 18,500 Russians killed in combat, says Ukraine. Some 18,500 members of the Russian forces have been killed in combat since the invasion began, Ukrainian officials say. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine said in a Facebook post that other Russian losses since the invasion on February 24 include 676 tanks, 1,858 armored vehicles, 150 warplanes and 134 helicopters. The Russian Defense Ministry hasn't released its own figures since March 25, when it said a total of 1,351 Russian servicemen had been killed and 3,825 wounded. The BBC can't independently verify these figures. On March 21, the staunchly pro-Kremlin newspaper, Komsomolskaya Pravda, published an article quoting the ministry as saying 9,861 Russian servicemen had died, a figure that exceeds even U.S. intelligence estimates of Russian fatalities.
U.S. ambassador to the UN calls for suspending Russia from the Human Rights Council.
U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Linda Thomas-Greenfield will seek to remove Russia from the UN Human Rights Council. In a press conference in Bucharest, Romania, today, Thomas Greenfield called Russian participation a farce and said Russia should not have a position of authority on the Council. Thomas Greenfield said she will bring the matter before the Security Council on Wednesday immediately after returning to New York, and expects the General Assembly to take up the issue as early as Thursday. In early March, 140 UN member states voted for a resolution condemning Russia for its invasion of Ukraine and demanding the withdrawal of military forces. Thomas Greenfield has been on a tour of Moldova and Romania, visiting refugee centers and speaking with local officials, NGOs, and refugees. She made her remarks at Bucharest's Gara de Nord train station, a transit center for Ukrainians fleeing through Romania. According to the UN, more than 4 million refugees have left Ukraine since the Russian invasion, and 643,058 had entered Romania as of Sunday. In an interview shortly after her speech, Thomas Greenfield told NPR's Michel Martin that Russia should be held to a higher standard as a permanent member of the Security Council, and yet has done everything they can to, in my view, damage the international order and to compromise the UN values, compromise the Human Rights Council. She vowed to hold them accountable, including through a suspension from the Council. It's more than symbolic, and it does have force because it continues what we have started, that is to isolate Russia and call them out for what they are doing, she said. They have a narrative that what they are doing is normal. This is not normal. It is not acceptable, and they will hear from the entire world that we will not continue to allow their misinformation, their propaganda, to be used on a UN platform.
Germany, France to expel dozens of Russian diplomats.
German foreign minister says move is a response to the unbelievable brutality unleashed by Russia in Ukraine. The German government is declaring 40 Russian diplomats undesirable persons, Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock has said, an act that is tantamount to expulsion from the country. The announcement on Monday follows similar moves by European partners in recent days as a reaction to Russia's war in Ukraine. Shortly after the German announcement, France said it would expel 35 Russian diplomats as part of a joint European action. Earlier on Monday, Lithuania threw out its Russian ambassador. Speaking as Russia faced growing global criticism over allegations that its forces had committed atrocities in Bucha, a town near Kiev, Germany's Baerbock said the move was a response to the unbelievable brutality the Kremlin had unleashed in Ukraine. The images from Bucha speak to unbelievable brutality by the Russian leadership and by those who follow its propaganda with a boundless will to exterminate, Baerbock said. Moscow said the German decision to expel a number of Russian diplomats was unfriendly and would worsen ties. The unfounded reduction in the number of diplomatic staff at Russian missions in Germany will narrow the space for maintaining dialogue between our countries, which will lead to a further deterioration in Russian-German relations, the Russian embassy in Berlin said in a statement posted on Telegram. Later on Monday, France announced it would expel dozens of Russian diplomats. France decided this evening to expel a number of Russian personnel with diplomatic status stationed in France whose activities are against our security interests, the French Foreign Ministry said in a statement. Dozens of bodies were found in mass graves or littering the streets following the withdrawal of Russian forces from Bucha. The Kremlin has denied Western allegations that Russian forces were responsible for killing civilians in Bucha. However, Baerbock said similar images were to be feared in other places that Russian troops have occupied.
Migrants think Biden's border rule change is too good to be true.
A 2.5-year-old boy dragged an oversized suitcase along the sidewalk excitedly, on the edge of a cramped migrant encampment straddling the US-Mexico border. Every few seconds, he looked behind him to make sure his parents were still there. But the boy wasn't going anywhere, and the suitcase was empty, much like the yearn for promise of being finally allowed to enter the United States. The boy, born in Brazil, and his parents, from Haiti, have spent 5 months living in a tent just feet from the US border. We will stay here until we can go to the other side, the boy's father said. On April 1, the Biden administration announced that on May 23, it will rescind Title 42, the pandemic-era, public health policy that allowed for the automatic expulsion of more than 1 million migrants to Mexico and other countries. The policy is why the little boy and his parents hadn't sought asylum. They're scared that if they crossed into the US and asked for protection, they'll be deported to Haiti. They instead opted to wait in Reynosa, Despite its reputation as one of Mexico's most dangerous cities, the repeal of the Trump-era rule is expected to trigger an influx of migrants to the US-Mexico border. Already, around 2,500 people are living in the public plaza here at the edge of the border, their tents packed together so tightly there's barely room to walk. While the policy change won't take effect for a month and a half, the response on both sides of the international line couldn't be more different. In the US, officials are busy expanding border facilities and sending more personnel to staff emergency operations. In Mexico, meanwhile, most of the tens of thousands of asylum seekers who've been waiting for months to cross legally at a port of entry have received no information from authorities and seem completely in the dark about what's to come. There are no guidelines for who gets to enter first, nor instructions about when and where to cross or even a line to sign up for.
3 GOP states sue Biden administration over end of restrictive pandemic border policy.
3 Republican-led states on Monday sued the Biden administration over its recently announced plan to end a policy that allows the U.S. to expeditiously expel migrants at the southern border, The Hill reports. The suit was filed by Missouri, Arizona, and Louisiana. The policy in question, known as Title 42, was implemented under former President Donald Trump for public health and COVID-19 related reasons, The Hill writes. The measure is governed by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, who on Friday announced the order would be coming to an end on May 23. In the lawsuit, the 3 GOP states are attempting to block the end of Title 42 by arguing that CDC, which issued the order, violated the Administrative Procedures Act by failing to allow for a comment period on its revocation, The Hill writes. Notably, the CDC did not implement the rule using such a rulemaking process. Instead, the Trump administration used a so-called sunset clause, which requires the CDC to review the order's necessity every 60 days. The states also argued in their suit that an end to Title 42 would bring about a large immigration surge with the potential to overwhelm border agents. The termination order will create an unprecedented surge at the border that will overwhelm defendants' capacity to enforce immigration laws at the border, the states wrote, per The Hill. Notably, Title 42 was never intended to be or become official immigration policy, it is simply a public health order, Department of Homeland Security officials have repeatedly commented. Though critics of the policy celebrated its impending termination, there are nonetheless plenty of people who were upset by the administration's decision. For example, in addition to the suit from Arizona, Missouri, and Louisiana, some believe a challenge out of Texas could be in the works.
Advocates hope SCOTUS will repeal Remain in Mexico this month.
The Trump-era policy forces asylum seekers to stay in shelters at the southwest border as they await their immigration proceedings. The Supreme Court is set to hear a case on April 26 that will determine whether the Biden administration can repeal the controversial Trump-era Remain in Mexico policy. The policy, officially known as Migrant Protection Protocols, MPP, forces asylum seekers to stay in shelters at the southwest border as they await their immigration proceedings in an already backlogged immigration system. The Biden v. Texas case questions whether a part of the U.S. Code requires the Department of Homeland Security to continue enforcing the policy. Biden initially suspended the program in February 2021 after pressure by immigration advocates, but after Texas and Missouri sued the federal government, a federal judge ordered it be reinstated in August. Now, the Supreme Court will decide whether the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit erred by concluding that the decision by Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas to terminate MPP had no legal effect. It's clear to us that the Department of Homeland Security has rightly concluded that Remain in Mexico is inherently flawed and puts the lives of people returned to Mexico in danger, said Kenji Kazuka, Associate Director of Research and Analysis for Refugee Protection at Human Rights First. We hope the Supreme Court does the right thing and allows the Department of Homeland Security to end the policy. The court order reinstating the policy went into effect in December 2021 and was accompanied by an expansion to include all asylum seekers from the Western Hemisphere, namely Haitians. Life at the border has proven to be dangerous. According to a joint report with Human Rights First, between February 2019 and February 2021, there were at least 1,544 publicly reported cases of murder, rape, torture, kidnapping, and other violent assaults against asylum seekers and migrants forced to return to Mexico under this program. These attacks include 341 cases of children who were kidnapped or nearly kidnapped in an already backlogged immigration court system, leaving them in the extremely dangerous situations they were trying to escape.
The Biden administration is now allowing prosecutors to dismiss certain deportation cases.
The memo is the latest effort on the part of the Biden administration's push to reshape the role of immigration enforcement in the U.S. The Biden administration issued a memo to ICE prosecutors on Monday authorizing them to consider dismissing certain cases involving immigrants who did not cross the border recently and are not public safety threats, according to a document obtained by BuzzFeed News. The memo is the latest effort on the part of the Biden administration's push to reshape the role of immigration enforcement in the U.S. by focusing on what they consider more serious targets. Unlike the Trump administration, which treated every undocumented immigrant as a priority for arrest and removal, President Joe Biden wants to target immigrants who are deemed public safety threats. Conservative critics have said officers have been hamstrung and effectively told not to do their jobs. This memorandum renews the commitment of all ICE attorneys, in exercising their inherent prosecutorial discretion authority, to advance the interests of justice and build public confidence in our immigration system. Consistent with the enforcement guidance issued by Secretary Mayorkas, ICE focuses its civil immigration enforcement priorities on the apprehension and removal of non-citizens who pose a threat to our national security, public safety, and border security, consistent with all legal requirements and applicable court orders, an ICE spokesperson said. The guidance, written by Chief ICE Attorney Carrie Doyle, a Biden appointee, was sent to prosecutors on Monday and represents another attempt by the agency to emphasize the discretion prosecutors have in court and lowered the backlog of cases in immigration court. Prosecutorial discretion is an indispensable feature of any functioning legal system. The exercise of prosecutorial discretion, where appropriate, can preserve limited government resources, achieve just and fair outcomes in individual cases, and advance DHS's mission of administering and enforcing the immigration laws of the United States in a smart and sensible way that promotes public confidence, Doyle wrote.
Legal immigration to the U.S. partially rebounds as national and global borders reopen.
The number of immigrants receiving green cards as new lawful U.S. permanent residents bounced back last year to pre-pandemic levels after plunging during the coronavirus outbreak, according to a new Pew Research Center analysis of recently available government data. Green cards issued to immigrants already in the United States seeking to adjust their temporary status rebounded above pre-pandemic levels, while the number of green cards for new arrivals also grew but did not reach earlier totals. About 282,000 people received green cards in July-September 2021, the final quarter of the fiscal year, according to quarterly admissions data from the Federal Office of Immigration Statistics. That number was higher than in any quarter since April-June 2017, and slightly higher than the quarterly average for the period from October 2015 to March 2020. During the pandemic, new green card issuances fell to a quarterly low of 79,000 in mid-2020. Arrivals of foreign tourists, business visitors, guest workers, foreign students and other temporary lawful migrants also rebounded somewhat, according to data for the final quarter of fiscal 2021, which ended September 30th. For the most part, however, arrivals of these lawful temporary migrants are still well below their pre-pandemic averages. Beginning in early 2020, the coronavirus pandemic had a big impact on migration worldwide. The U.S. closed land borders with Canada and Mexico to non-essential travel through late 2021, and air travel between countries also was severely restricted. 3/4 of U.S. consulates globally, which issue visas, remained closed through June 2021. U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, which processes applications for immigrants already in the U.S., suspended in-person interviews as well as other services during the height of the pandemic. Other countries, both sources of immigrants and transit corridors for them, closed their borders early on in the pandemic, bringing international migration nearly to a halt.
GOP eyes linking Title 42 to coronavirus deal.
Republicans are eyeing an attempt to link a Trump-era immigration policy to a coronavirus relief deal that senators are hoping to pass by the end of the week. GOP senators are pushing for a vote targeting the Biden administration's decision to end Title 42, which allowed migrants at the border to be summarily expelled from the country instead of being processed under regular immigration rules and allowed to exercise their right to claim asylum, as part of a debate over a $10 billion coronavirus relief deal announced earlier Monday. In order to pass the $10 billion coronavirus aid deal before the chamber leaves for a 2-week break, Senate leadership is going to need cooperation from all 100 senators. That could give Republicans leverage to push for an amendment vote. It seems like there's kind of critical mass behind that idea. How the Democrats want to handle that issue may have some bearing on how and when the COVID bill proceeds, said Senator John Thune, SD, the number 2 Senate Republican. Thune added that if Democrats want to pass the coronavirus bill this week, they are going to have to negotiate with Republicans to speed things up. Republicans would need a decision by the Senate parliamentarian but think an amendment related to Title 42 would qualify for getting a simple majority vote, if Democrats let it come up. That could put Democrats in a politically awkward spot. Several Senate Democrats have been critical of the administration's decision to end the Trump-era policy. Because of the 50-50 Senate, Republicans would need only one of those Democrats to vote for their amendment to get it added into a coronavirus relief bill. In addition to trying to get changes into the coronavirus bill, Republicans are expected to focus on the border heading into November. The administration on Friday rescinded Title 42, the Trump-era policy that allows for the rapid expulsion of migrants at the border and blocks them from seeking asylum. The order from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention lifts Title 42 on May 23.
Collins, Murkowski, Romney help break deadlock on Jackson's nomination.
Senate Democrats, backed by 3 GOP senators, voted on Monday night to break a deadlock on Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson's Supreme Court nomination, paving the way for her to be confirmed by the end of the week. Senators voted 53-47 to formally discharge Jackson's nomination to the full Senate. It's the first time the Senate has had to take the procedural step for a Supreme Court nominee since 1853. GOP Senators Susan Collins, Maine, Lisa Murkowski, Alaska, and Mitt Romney, Utah, voted with Democrats to make Jackson's nomination available for a full Senate vote. Collins announced last week that she would vote for Jackson. Meanwhile, Murkowski and Romney said in statements on Monday that they would back Jackson, becoming the second and third GOP senators to support her, respectively. I will support the motion to discharge Judge Jackson's nomination later tonight, and her confirmation later this week, Murkowski said in a statement. Romney added in a separate statement that he had concluded that she is a well-qualified jurist and a person of honor. While I do not expect to agree with every decision she may make on the court, I believe that she more than meets the standard of excellence and integrity, he added. Monday's vote puts Jackson on track to be confirmed as the first black, female Supreme Court justice by the end of the week. Despite Republican obstruction, Judge Jackson has enough votes to get confirmed by the Supreme Court on a bipartisan basis. The Senate is going to keep working until she is confirmed, Senate Majority Leader Charles Schumer, DNY, said on Monday. Schumer is expected to move on Tuesday to formally tee up an initial vote on Jackson's nomination for Thursday. After that, Republicans could delay a final vote on Jackson's nomination until Friday if they eat up an additional 30 hours of debate time.
CDC, under fire for COVID response, announces plans to revamp agency.
Outsider named to conduct 1-month review with an eye toward modernizing. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention Director Rochelle Walensky announced plans Monday to revamp the agency that has come under blistering criticism for its performance leading the U.S. response to the coronavirus pandemic, saying, "It is time to step back and strategically position CDC to support the future of public health." In an agency-wide email sent shortly after 1 p.m., Walensky said she has hired a senior federal health official outside of the Atlanta-based agency to conduct a 1-month review to kick off an evaluation of CDC's structure, systems, and processes. Over the past year, I have heard from many of you that you would like to see CDC build on its rich history and modernize for the world around us, she wrote in the email. I am grateful for your efforts to lean into the hard work of transforming CDC for the better. I look forward to our collective efforts to position CDC, and the public health community, for greatest success in the future. A copy of the email was shared with the Washington Post. Since the pandemic began more than 2 years ago, the once-storied agency has been under fire for its pandemic response, from initial delays developing a coronavirus test, to the severe eligibility limits to get the test, to missteps often attributed to Trump administration meddling. But even under the Biden administration, the agency's guidance on masking, isolation and quarantine, and booster doses has been repeatedly faulted for being confusing. A consistent criticism has been the agency's failure to be agile, especially with analysis and release of real-time data. Walensky seemed to acknowledge those criticisms in brief public remarks about the reasons for the reorganization. Never in its 75-year history has CDC had to make decisions so quickly, based on often limited, real-time, and evolving science, she said in the statement. As we've challenged our state and local partners, we know that now is the time for CDC to integrate the lessons learned into a strategy for the future.
Another booster? A vaccine for Omicron? Here's what could be next for COVID vaccines.
Most vaccinated people will probably require yet another COVID-19 vaccine booster shot in the fall, a top Food and Drug Administration official said Monday. That's when we'll probably have a fair amount of waning immunity in combination with likely further evolution of the virus, along with people going back inside, where the coronavirus spreads more easily, Dr. Peter Marks, director of the FDA's Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, told NPR in an interview. Marks says the U.S. must start planning now for whether everyone needs another shot and, if so, what kind of shot exactly. We could basically wait until another wave comes along and then try to make another vaccine and try to deal with it, but I think we know that doesn't work, because we can't manufacture and deploy vaccine fast enough, Marks says. The FDA is convening a special meeting of the agency's independent outside advisors on Wednesday for a day-long meeting to begin to plan the next round of boosters. The meeting comes about a week after the agency authorized a fourth shot, a second booster, for anyone age 50 or older to shore up immunity ahead of a possible new surge sooner than the fall. A more contagious Omicron subvariant known as BA.2, which has fueled surges in other countries, is now dominant in the U.S., raising fears of another surge. The tricky part of determining what to do in the fall is determining what version of the coronavirus will be dominant by then, Marks says. It could be the Omicron variant, but it could also be an entirely new variant. That raises doubts about just giving people a fifth shot of the current vaccine, he says. There is a certain diminishing return by giving the same vaccine over and over, Marks says. We have had enough evolution of this virus that it would make sense to want to try to cover some of the genetic diversity that has been introduced into the mix.
Sri Lanka MPs leave Gotabaya Rajapaksa-led coalition.
More than 40 MPs have left Sri Lankan President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's coalition government. MPs from parties aligned with Mr. Rajapaksa's Sri Lanka Pajajana Paramuna, SLPP, led coalition said they would now independently represent themselves. The move comes as the South Asian nation is grappling with power cuts and shortages because of an economic and foreign exchange crisis. This has led to mass protests demanding Mr. Rajapaksa's resignation. It is unclear what the implications of the MPs' actions are at this point. They have distanced themselves from the government, but have not extended support to the opposition. It could, however, call into question the Prime Minister's authority over the parliament. Mr. Rajapaksa's cabinet has already resigned, but both the president and his brother, Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, have so far refused to step down. Instead, the president called on opposition parties to help him form a national government and accept cabinet portfolios. They have all refused and have reiterated demands for him to resign. What the people want is for this president and the entire government to step down, said Sajit Premadasa, leader of the Samaji Jana Balawigaya, Sri Lanka's main opposition alliance. Angry Sri Lankans want president to go. On Tuesday, a freshly appointed finance minister also announced he was quitting the job, less than 24 hours after accepting the post. Ali Sabari, a close ally of President Rajapaksa, said he would give up his parliament seat for someone outside politics who might be suitable to handle the situation. Meanwhile, anti-government protests continued on Tuesday in major cities across the country. People can't afford their daily rice, their dal, their basic necessities. People can't get on buses to come to work, to go to school, one protester told the BBC. How much worse can it get? There's no petrol, there's no diesel, kids can't sit their exams because there's no paper, said another.
West Africa faces historic food crisis driven by conflict, price surge.
West Africa is facing its worst food crisis on record driven by conflict, drought, and the impact of the war in Ukraine on food prices and availability, aid agencies said on Tuesday. There are about 27 million people suffering from hunger in the region, and that number could rise to 38 million by June, a 40% increase from last year and a historic high, said 11 international aid organizations in a joint statement. Large swathes of West Africa, including parts of Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger and Nigeria, are facing Islamist insurgencies that have forced millions of people off their land. Along with Chad, those are the countries most affected by hunger. The region has also seen worsening floods and droughts due to the effects of climate change, making it harder to farm. Cereal production in 2021/22 was down 39% year-on-year in Niger and 15% in Mali, according to West Africa's Food Crisis Prevention Network. On top of that, global food prices have surged and trade has been disrupted due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Border closures due to COVID-19 have also had a negative impact, the Food Crisis Prevention Network said. What is new and worsening is mainly all the displaced people and abandoned land because of conflict, but also we are witnessing new drivers, said Asalama Dal-Aksidi, Oxfam's regional director for West and Central Africa. 6 West African countries import 30 to 50% of their wheat from Russia and Ukraine, according to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO. The Ukraine war also risks redirecting much-needed funding from the region, Sidi warned. Many donors have already indicated that they may cut funding for Africa to pay for refugees in Europe, she said.
Barack Obama is coming back to the White House.
Former President Barack Obama is coming back to the White House on Tuesday for the first time since leaving office, and he's going to speak about one of his favorite topics, the Affordable Care Act. The White House hasn't released details of exactly what will happen or when, describing the event merely as an effort to celebrate the 2010 health care law that Obama signed and that Joe Biden, who was then the vice president, memorably called a big fucking deal. But in addition to touting the law's accomplishments and survival in the face of repeated Republican efforts at repeal, Obama is likely to promote a pair of Democratic efforts to make it stronger. One of these Democratic efforts is legislative. Biden and Democratic leaders want to extend a temporary boost in the financial assistance available to people buying private insurance through the law's online marketplaces, including healthcare.gov. The boost was part of the government's COVID-19 relief effort and expires at the end of this year. The Build Back Better legislation Biden and Democrats tried and failed to pass last year included a proposal to extend the program for a few years, potentially sparing more than 14 million people from significant premium hikes. That bill died because of a series of objections by Senator Joe Manchin, D-W.va. Biden and party leaders are now working on a narrower bill they hope will get his support. They want some version of the ACA proposal to be in that package. The other Democratic initiative is regulatory. Biden has promised to use his executive authority to rewrite some of the Affordable Care Act's rules, including one that has left a group of low-income families unable to get subsidies for private insurance. In policy circles, that situation has come to be known as the family glitch, because it affects spouses and dependents of low-wage workers facing high insurance premiums, about 5.1 million of them, according to a 2021 estimate by the Henry J. Kaiser Family Foundation.
Trump asks judge to recuse from racketeering suit against Hillary Clinton.
Trump lawyers say the Bill Clinton-appointed jurist shouldn't handle the case over Russia 2016 election claims. Lawyers for former President Donald Trump are asking a federal judge appointed by President Bill Clinton to step aside from a suit Trump filed last month claiming that Hillary Clinton and her political allies engaged in a racketeering conspiracy to falsely accuse Trump of colluding with Russia to gain support in the 2016 U.S. presidential election. Court records show U.S. District Court Judge Donald Middlebrooks was assigned to the suit on March 24, the same day Trump's attorneys filed the case in the Southern District of Florida, where Trump currently resides. Trump lawyers Alina Habba and Peter Ticktin contend that Middlebrooks could be seen as biased because Bill Clinton chose him for the federal court bench in 1997. There is no question that judges, Middlebrooks' impartiality would be questioned by a disinterested observer, fully informed of the facts, due to judge's relationship with the defendant either individually or by the very nature of his appointment to the federal bench, by the defendant's husband, Habba and Ticktin wrote in a motion filed on Monday. The most important issue is not simply that justice must be done, but also that justice must appear to be done. This could not be more important in a case like the above-styled cause, where wrongs in regard to a presidential election are to be redressed. Motions to recuse based on the identity or party of the president who appointed a judge are rarely granted. In a largely two-party system, federal judges are virtually certain to have been appointed by the political rivals of a president or his political allies. The motion filed on Monday does not indicate whether Trump would seek recusal of a Trump-appointed judge from the case. However, recusals sometimes occur when a judge worked on a political campaign or has a more personal connection to a candidate. The filing does seem to try to draw out such information.
As Trump investigations heat up, signs of desperation emerge.
March was not a good month for Donald Trump. Last week alone, Trump got 4 major pieces of bad news. On March 27, the New York Times reported that investigators were focused on the role of his December 19, 2020, "It will be wild" tweet inviting supporters to the Capitol on January 6. The focus is on the tweet as a call to action to extremist groups. On March 28, a federal court said in an opinion that it was more likely than not that Trump committed crimes at the end of his term trying to overturn the election. On March 29, Bob Woodward and Robert Costa reported a 7-hour January 6 gap in Trump's White House phone log, a gap that covered the entire January 6 siege. On March 30, reports emerged that the Justice Department was expanding its investigation into the role of members of Trump's circle in planning the January 6 rally and of Trump allies' connections to the bogus electoral slate certificates that 7 states Republicans had sent to Congress for the January 6 electoral vote count. So desperate was the former president to change the subject midweek that he publicly asked one of the world's most hated men, Vladimir Putin, to disclose dirt on Hunter Biden. Following the unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, Putin's favorables in America dropped to 4%. Soliciting help from someone whose favorability polls in the range of Charles Manson's can hardly help one's own political standing. Also reflecting desperation was another Trump action late last month, apparently to escape the increasing risk of exposing his endorsement's weakness. On March 20, Trump withdrew his support for Republican Mo Brooks Arala to become an Alabama senator. Trump's explanation? He said that Brooks had gone woke. Mo Brooks? Gone woke? The man's campaign website blares that he voted 50+ times to repeal or defund Obamacare, and it proudly displays a photo of Brooks at the January 6 rally, where he declared that today is the day that American patriots start taking down names and kicking ass, moments before the violent Capitol siege. That Mo Brooks?
Will Smith's Oscar slap is derailing several of his movie productions.
A week out from his hitting Chris Rock, Bad Boys 4 and Fast and Loose have reportedly stalled. About 10 seconds after Chris Rock joked that Jada Pinkett Smith was going to be in G.I. Jane 2 at the 2022 Oscars, the energy of the ceremony shifted. Will Smith ascended to the stage and delivered Rock a swift slap across the face, sending a shockwave of silence across the room and social media feeds into a frenzy. Smith went on to later win the Best Actor trophy for his work in King Richard, but by the time that happened, most people were in a daze. What just happened? By the next morning, it was apparent, the reverberations of that slap were going to be coursing through Hollywood for some time to come. And not just in the form of essays and statements. Last Friday, Smith made an announcement that he was resigning from the Academy, adding, "My actions at the 94th Academy Awards presentation were shocking, painful, and inexcusable. The list of those I have hurt is long and includes Chris, his family, many of my dear friends and loved ones, all those in attendance, and global audiences at home." And now, as the incident is officially 1 week in the rearview, Smith is starting to see tangible repercussions following his actions at the Academy Awards, as in, ones that are going to hurt his bottom line. Smith's upcoming Netflix film Fast and Loose has reportedly slowed production, per The Hollywood Reporter. The film, which had already lost its director prior to Smith's altercation, was supposedly reprioritized following the Oscars. It's not hard to imagine that it would be ramped up in priority had the evening passed without Smith's outburst. Smith was set to star in the film, which told the story of a crime boss who loses his memory after an attack. That news comes on the heels of another one of Smith's project's derailments. Also, according to The Hollywood Reporter, Smith was recently given the first 40 or so pages of the script for Bad Boys 4, but that production has also been slowed for the time being.
A Fort Lauderdale personal injury lawyer ran over 4 people at a fresh market, cops say.
A Fort Lauderdale personal injury attorney has been hit with an emergency suspension from the Florida bar after security video and witnesses say she drove her Kia into 4 people on a sidewalk outside the Fresh Market, according to Stewart police. When officers stopped Beatrice Bijou, they say she told them she meant to hit the people. She wasn't trying to drum up business, but, rather, voices in her head had told her to kill the people, an arrest report said. Bijou, who has been held without bond in Martin County Jail since the February 22 incident, pleaded not guilty to 1 count of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, 1 count of high-speed or wanton fleeing and 4 counts of attempted murder. On March 21, the state Supreme Court granted the bar's request of emergency suspension for Bijou, who was admitted to the bar in 2016.
Trump upset with the state of his new social media site, Eyes Shakeup.
Top executives from former President Donald Trump's social media venture, Truth Social, have departed the company as the site has struggled to gain traction with users. 3 top executives quit Truth Social, including Chief Technology Officer Josh Adams and Billy Boozer, the head of the company's product development, and Chief Legal Officer Lori Bedner, according to 2 people familiar with the matter. Reuters first reported the departures of Adams and Boozer. Trump has been upset with the state of his social media venture, Truth Social, and is eyeing major shakeups to the company, including positions on the board of Truth Social's parent company, Trump Media and Technology Group, according to one of those people familiar with the matter and a separate person as well. Trump's frustration comes as the site has struggled mightily upon launch, with low traffic and persistent tech glitches. It is also now suffering from personnel issues too. Neither Adams nor Bedner list their job titles with Truth Social on their personal profiles, despite previously having listed it. A spokesperson for Truth Social did not return a request for comment. Trump launched the Truth Social app as a way to take on big tech. He and his allies argued it would rival major social media platforms like Twitter and Facebook, which both removed the former president from their platforms following the January 6 riots on Capitol Hill. So far, however, Truth Social has failed to gain traction or popularity among users. The app has seen a 93% drop in sign-ups since its launch, and installs declined by 800,000 users, according to data from Sensor Tower, a mobile analytics firm. Following news of the decline in usage, shares for Digital World Acquisition Corporation, the special-purpose acquisition company that is joining with Trump Media and Technology Group, the company backing Truth Social, declined by over 30%, according to Bloomberg. Trump himself has only posted once on the app. He had 827,000 followers as of Monday morning.
Britney Spears, singer, confirms she is writing new memoir.
Britney Spears has confirmed that she is in the process of writing a book, confirming recent reports in U.S. media that the star intended to pen a new tell-all memoir. Spears shared the news in a message posted on Instagram on Monday night. The singer said the memoir will tackle painful events in her life that she has never been able to express openly. In November, a judge ended a legal guardianship that controlled many aspects of her life for over a decade. Spears was put into a conservatorship managed by her father, Jamie Spears, in 2008, when the star faced a mental health crisis. The controversial arrangement allowed him to take power over her finances and career decisions, plus major personal matters, such as her visits to her teenage sons and whether she could remarry. While the star didn't reveal any details about a potential release date or publisher, Page Six reported in February that she had reached a $15 million, $11.4 million, deal with the publishing house Simon & Schuster to chronicle her life, career and relationship with her family during and after her conservatorship. Spears wrote that the process of writing the book has been healing and therapeutic, though she added that it had been difficult bringing up past events in her life. The 40-year-old added that she has taken an intellectual approach to writing the memoir. However, the star also hit out at her mother and sister, who she accused of taking an indulgence by writing their own books, as I couldn't even get a cup of coffee of drive my car. Spears has been engaged in a public dispute with her sister, Jamie Lynn, since the later she appeared on Good Morning America to promote her book, Things I Should Have Said. The book details her own life story, including her young daughter's near-fatal accident in 2017, her relationship with Britney and the role she played in the singer's controversial conservatorship.
Bucha killings raised serious questions about possible war crimes.
In a statement on Monday, UN Human Rights Chief Michelle Bachelet said she was horrified by the images of people lying dead on the streets and in improvised graves. Reports emerging from this and other areas raise serious and disturbing questions about possible war crimes, grave breaches of international humanitarian law, and serious violations of international human rights law, she said. Preserve all evidence. Ms. Bachelet called for all bodies to be exhumed and identified so that the victims' families can be informed, and the exact causes of death established. She added that every measure should also be taken to preserve evidence. It is vital that all efforts are made to ensure there are independent and effective investigations into what happened in Bucha, to ensure truth, justice, and accountability, as well as reparations and remedy for victims and their families, she said. The UN in Ukraine has also joined the Secretary-General's call for a probe into what happened in Bucha. Rights monitors on the way. Osnat Labrani, UN humanitarian coordinator in Ukraine, highlighted the horrifying violence against civilians in the city and in two other areas near the capital, Irpin and Hostomel, as well as in other parts of the country. It is essential that all reports of violence against civilians are independently verified, she said, and the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine is trying to visit these locations without delay. An independent investigation is critical to determine the extent of these crimes and to ensure that perpetrators are held to account, she added. A man walks in front of a crater left by an explosion during escalating conflict in Kyiv, Ukraine.
Macron calls for Russian oil and coal ban as Biden condemns brutal Putin.
The US and France called for a significant escalation of sanctions against Russia after reports of atrocities by its forces in Ukraine, with Emmanuel Macron urging a ban on Russian oil and coal imports and Joe Biden proposing a trial for war crimes. The French and US presidents on Monday joined a chorus of Western condemnation after reports of civilian killings and mass graves emerged over the weekend from Bucha, a city about 25 kilometers northwest of Kyiv, and other areas that were until recently under Russian occupation. There are very clear indications of war crimes, Macron said in an interview on France Inter Radio on Monday. What happened in Bucha demands a new round of sanctions and very clear measures, so we will coordinate with our European partners, especially with Germany. He added, I think that on oil and coal we must be able to move forward. We should certainly advance on sanctions. We can't accept this. Biden vowed to ramp up sanctions on Russia and called for a trial to assess possible war crimes committed by President Vladimir Putin's forces in Ukraine. This guy is brutal and what's happening in Bucha is outrageous, Biden said. I'm going to continue to add more sanctions. He added that we have to gather all the details to actually have war crimes trial. Biden's comments came as U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan warned that the war was unlikely to be resolved soon, predicting that Russia would deploy tens of thousands of soldiers to Ukraine's Donbas region as part of a strategic shift of focus towards the east of the country. The next stage of this conflict may very well be protracted, Sullivan said. We should be under no illusions that Russia will adjust its tactics, which have included and will likely continue to include wanton and brazen attacks on civilian targets. The U.S. Treasury said it would stop Russia from making debt payments in dollars through American banks.
Biden says Bucha killings a war crime, seeks new Russia sanctions.
The Kremlin dismissed the allegations as Ukrainian subterfuge, while Russia's military continued bombarding Ukraine's southern coastline, moves in line with U.S. intelligence assessments that Putin is focusing offensive operations on the south and east rather than the entire country, in a new phase of the war likely to play out over months or longer. The prospect of a protracted war of attrition has revived questions about which country could hold on longer, Ukraine, suffering under relentless artillery barrages and food shortages, or Russia, facing military setbacks and crippling economic sanctions. In his remarks to reporters at the Fort McNair Army base in Washington, Biden promised to impose additional sanctions on Moscow, while his aides announced support for a multinational team of prosecutors that would visit the region to collect evidence of atrocities, a process that officials cautioned would take time. The images we have seen and reports we have heard suggest these atrocities are not the act of a rogue soldier, State Department spokesman Ned Price said. They are part of a broader troubling campaign. Other sanctions efforts continue to pace on Monday, with U.S. and Spanish authorities seizing a 255-foot superyacht owned by Russian billionaire Viktor Vekselberg as part of a wider drive to punish the financial elite close to Putin. The United States also plans to push for the suspension of Russia from the UN Human Rights Council, UN Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield said Monday. The suspension would require a two-thirds majority vote by the 193-member General Assembly.
War crimes charges could help Putin, not hurt him.
The truth is, both now as in the past, Putin's regime has been remarkably stable. What's more, many of the same prognosticators forecasting the demise of Putin today have done so before and have not fared well. When the global financial crisis smashed the Russian economy in 2008, Russia watchers forecast the end of the Putin era. When a nationwide wave of anti-corruption protests denounced the re-election of Vladimir Putin and his United Russia Party in 2011-12, experts called it the beginning of the end of Putin. Ukraine's 2014 revolution of dignity, and Russia's subsequent war in the Donbass was the end of Putin. Or maybe it would be the economic sanctions and Russia's crumbling economy that would do Putin in. In 2017, it was Alexei Navalny who may have finally had Putin's number. In 2018, it was pension reform that was the beginning of the end of Putin's regime. In 2019, we were told the election of Volodymyr Zelensky in Ukraine may lead to the overthrow of Vladimir Putin's regime by demonstrating the vacuousness of Kremlin propaganda. By 2020, it was dissatisfied youth and a bungled national response to the COVID-19 pandemic that would topple Vladimir Putin. Now, it is the war, sanctions and popular backlash that could be his undoing. And yet, Putin endures. Of course, political prognostication is hard. The future is contingent, unknowable, and unexpected surprises lurk everywhere. Plus, Kremlinologists are especially snake-bitten over our famous failure to foresee the collapse of the Soviet Union a generation ago. Still, I've quipped to fellow Russia watchers that, objectively speaking, they would be far better served by predicting that it is not the end of Vladimir Putin. That way, at most, they'd only ever be wrong once, instead of being wrong every single time. Even if the smart money is on Putin staying in power, that doesn't explain why we keep expecting him to fall.
Ukraine President Zelensky says he will address UN Security Council on Tuesday.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said he would address the UN Security Council on Tuesday and predicted further, worse instances of mass killings of civilians by Russian troops would be discovered. Tuesday's Security Council session is to consider Ukrainian allegations of the murder of civilians by Russian soldiers in Bucha, northwest of Kiev, following the discovery of hundreds of bodies, some bound and shot at close range. Russia has categorically denied the accusations, calling them criminal provocations, and says it will present empirical evidence to the Security Council that its forces have not been involved in atrocities. The Ukrainian leader has already spoken by video link to more than a dozen assemblies, including the US Congress, the British Parliament and the European Parliament. I would like to emphasize that we are interested in the most complete, transparent investigation, the results of which will be known and explained to the entire international community, a stern-looking Zelensky said in his nightly video address in early hours on Tuesday. In Bucha, where mass graves and bodies were found after Ukraine took the town back from Russian forces, at least 300 civilians had been killed, Zelensky said. And this is only one town, one of many Ukrainian communities which the Russian forces managed to capture, he said. Now, there is information that in Borodyanka and some other liberated Ukrainian towns, the number of casualties of the occupiers may be even much higher. Ukrainian authorities say they have restored control over all of Kyiv region and other districts.
Putin would take Ukraine's neutrality as permission.
As secret and not-so-secret peace negotiations between Moscow and Kyiv proceed amid fierce fighting, Ukraine's neutrality has re-emerged as Vladimir Putin's key condition for ending the war that he started. The Ukrainians' supposed lack of neutrality, that is, their repudiation of pro-Moscow rulers and their tilt toward the West, was the Russian president's excuse for invading. Because Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has conditionally agreed to the Kremlin's demand that Finlandization of Ukraine will, in short order, once again be brooded about as a possible solution, one that the West could accept as a satisfactory resolution to the current crisis and as reason enough to eventually remove sanctions on Russia. But dropping sanctions under that circumstance would be a costly mistake. Unlike the Soviet Union's rules for Finland during the Cold War, Putin's conditions for the cessation of hostilities will not end with Ukraine's neutrality. Dina Kapiva, Putin is just following the manual. After World War II, Moscow allowed Finland to keep its Western-style democracy and market economy in exchange for an implicit but inviolable pledge not to join NATO or Western economic and political bodies. Not coincidentally, Finland entered the European Union only after the fall of the Soviet Union. But relations between Finland and the Soviet Union during the Cold War differed enormously from those between Ukraine and Putin's Russia today. Ukraine is immeasurably more important to Russia than Finland was to the Soviet Union. It is central to both Russia's national identity and the political imperatives of the Putin regime's survival. Helsinki is not Kiev, which Putin has extolled as the birthplace of Russian Christianity and the mother of Russian cities. The Ukrainians are the same people as the Russians, Putin claims. They are united, he declared in a long essay published last summer, by the same language and economic ties.
A world remade? Lessons from the Ukraine War.
To say that the early 21st century is a turbulent era is an understatement. In the last 2 decades, the international system has experienced the incremental reactivation and intensification of geopolitical rivalries. As any historian can attest, such phenomenon is hardly surprising in the grand scheme of things. In this respect, as a fateful turning point, the recent outbreak of the Ukraine war likely represents the first major violent clash of the new Cold War, an unfolding drama of rising strategic competition. This development has buried the optimistic spirit that flourished in the 90s and replaced it with a dark and ominous zeitgeist. Although its outcome is still unclear, it already provides instructive lessons about developing trends and harsh realities whose understanding is crucial to envisage what the future might bring in the coming decades and to prepare accordingly. Their implications cannot be described as pleasant, but one cannot afford to ignore them for that reason. Thus, the in-depth assimilation of the following lessons is essential for policymakers, analysts and researchers involved in foreign policy, national security, intelligence analysis, military statecraft and grand strategy. Lesson 1: War is not going anywhere. The reduced likelihood of a direct war between great powers thanks to a cool-headed reluctance to unleash a nuclear Armageddon and the eruption of several irregular wars in recent decades has projected the illusion that conventional interstate conflict is obsolete. Such belief is out of touch with reality. It is simply not supported by empirical evidence. Episodes like the Iran-Iraq War, the Gulf War, the 2003 Anglo-American invasion of Iraq, the 2008 Russo-Georgian War, and the 2020 Nagorno-Karabakh War demonstrate that hard power remains an asset that national states can resort to against their counterparts in order to pursue their interests in a zero-sum world.